40 years ago, Franco Zeffirelli's epic TV series, Jesus of Nazareth, was seen by a U.S. audience of 90 million and was a huge hit across the world. Robert Powell's portrayal is widely regarded as the most powerful Jesus ever seen on screen.
Into thy hands I commit my spirit.
Now Robert is on a journey across the Holy Land to discover the real Jesus of Nazareth. He has learned of the young man preaching a radical apocalyptic message.
Jesus would have stood in this synagogue and spoken to the people of Magdala.
And followed him to Jerusalem, where the Gospels say he clashed with the religious authorities.
Jerusalem, the faithful city, she that was full of justice, has become a harlot.
Now Robert looks at the final days of Jesus' life.
So you're standing on the actual steps where they said, "This is the man."
And uncovers clues about the death of the real man who would inspire the biggest religion on earth. As Robert searches modern Jerusalem for evidence of the real Jesus, it's hard to imagine what the city might have been like during his lifetime. "2,000 years ago, the province of Judea was under direct Roman rule. In Jerusalem, the Jewish authorities were allowed to remain in control, but only as long as they kept the peace. The Gospels tell us that in his final days, Jesus' message wasn't always peaceful.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites all! For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. You do not go in yourselves, nor do you let others enter.
His radical apocalyptic message was getting through to the ordinary people of Jerusalem. But it had also brought him to the attention of the Jewish authorities, who were worried about him stirring up trouble during the annual festival of Passover.
It would be like a carnival atmosphere, thousands of people feasting, telling stories, drinking. It was a cauldron of a place at that time.
The Passover feast was celebrated every year by Jews who would come to Jerusalem. This event from the Old Testament commemorated the time when God saved his people of Israel from their foreign oppressor, Egypt. The Romans understood that the Passover feast was the most incendiary time of the year. This was one time of the year when the Roman governor would come into Jerusalem with Roman soldiers to make sure there was no uprising.
As the first night of the festival approached, Jesus told his disciples to prepare for the traditional Passover meal. Whether he knew at this point that the Jewish authorities were already watching him is unclear. However, the Gospels of Mark and Luke suggest that Jesus was warning his disciples to take extra care on their way. Secretive or not, this meal would be the Last Supper Jesus would share with his disciples. According to Christian tradition, the Last Supper took place here, at the site of the Church of the Cenacle, from the Latin word for dining room. The church is located on the hill of Mount Zion, in the southwest of the ancient city. Robert has come here with archaeologist Shimon Gibson to find out whether this really could be the place mentioned in the Gospels.
It's a chapel, and in style, it dates from the Crusader period, so we're talking about 12th century.
How did it come to be regarded as the site of the Last Supper?
Well, on Mount Zion, and we're situated here on Mount Zion, a Crusader church was built. It was a very large cathedral, and in the vicinity of this cathedral there was an earlier church known as the Church of the Apostles, and it was going back to almost to the time of Jesus, just after. And so there was this idea that perhaps if the Church of the Apostles was situated here, maybe the room of the Last Supper was here. So they simply chose one of the chapels in the cathedral and called it the room of the Last Supper.
But no physical evidence links this location to the Last Supper. Just half a mile west of this church is an area that Shimon believes much more closely fits the place described in the Gospels. This discovery sheds new light on 2,000 years of Christian tradition.
We're in the pool of Siloam, which is on the southern side of the ancient city of Jerusalem, and anybody coming into the city would have to come through the city gate, enter into this pool, purify themselves, and then enter into the city proper, go up to the temple. And this is the connection that we have here with the room of the Last Supper, because one has to be very frank. We don't know where the room was located. We do know that it was somewhere in the vicinity of the entrance into the city where the disciples would have come in, and they would have come in from this direction.
The Gospels of Mark and Luke say that the Last Supper took place in an upstairs room.
In excavations in the general vicinity, houses have been found dating back to the 1st century with remnants of 3 stories. So it is possible that one of these buildings may have served as the place of the room of the Last Supper.
This area, with multi-story buildings and close to where Jesus and his disciples would have entered Jerusalem, would be a more likely place for the Last Supper than the Church of the Cenacle.
Blessed be thou, Lord our God, who hast blessed us with thy laws, and made bread issue from the earth.
It was at this Passover meal where Jesus performed a symbolic act that would become one of the key rituals of the Christian faith.
In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he institutes the Lord's Supper, where he gives the unleavened bread that was eaten at the Passover meal.
Eat it, for this is my body.
And then he takes one of the cups of wine that was celebrated at the Passover meal, and he gives it to his disciples, and he says,
This is my blood, the blood of the new covenant, which is to be poured out for many.
And then he says these words about how the bread and wine that they're eating are significant of his body and his blood, and that whenever they do this, they should think of him.
For the Gospel writers, this was an act of communion between Jesus and his disciples. Modern Christians replicate it by performing the Eucharist. Christians believe that Jesus knew this would be the final meal with his disciples.
They probably ate most of their meals together, and they had a meal before he got arrested, and I think that certainly happened. But the idea that he used this event in order to foreshadow his death presupposes that he knew he was going to die. Well, that's later Christian theology.
It is impossible to know whether Jesus was aware that he was about to be arrested. But one thing the Gospels all agree on is that his betrayal had already been set in motion. After the Last Supper, the Gospels say that Jesus and his disciples went to an olive grove, the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed while his disciples slept. The traditional location of Gethsemane is at the foot of the Mount of Olives, less than a mile from the Siloam Pool. Robert has come here to meet biblical scholar Stephen Fan.
Now, Garden of Gethsemane. Was it a garden or was it a field like the Mount of Olives where olive trees grow?
Where we're sitting here right now is very similar to what would have existed back at that time. All the vegetation in this garden would have been found on hillsides in Jerusalem, in the surrounding area, anytime over those centuries. And some of these trees actually are centuries old that are inside of this garden.
Stephen believes Gethsemane was a logical place for pilgrims like Jesus and the disciples to spend the night while in Jerusalem.
This hillside would have been covered with small little groups of people, families who were coming for the feast, because there wasn't enough room in the city itself to hold the tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people that would be here for Passover.
By being out in the open, so close to the city walls, Jesus was an easy target for the Jewish authorities, who had decided that he needed to be arrested. But how would they have known where to find him? The Gospels say it was one of those closest to Jesus who betrayed him.
The Gospels suggest that the way in which the chief priests got rid of Jesus was through one of his 12 apostles, a man called Judas Iscariot.
In the film, Judas is played by Ian McShane.
This is your hour, Judas. The hour of shadows.
There seems to be no doubt that Jesus was betrayed by one of his followers, Judas Iscariot. The reason there's no doubt is because it's attested in all of our sources consistently, and because it's not the kind of story that Christian storytellers would have wanted to make up. Because this shows that one of Jesus' own turned him in.
Oh, Master. You betray your master with a kiss.
My sense is that we don't have historical evidence about how Judas really betrayed Jesus, but that the kiss was put into the story as a way of portraying the irony of one of Jesus' closest disciples being the one who turns him in.
That is the man. Arrest him.
Judas! You traitor!
No!
You betrayed him!
Traditionally, Judas has been considered the villain of the story, but his motivation for betraying Jesus has always been ambiguous.
Possibly it was greed. There's a suggestion in the Gospels that he does it for money, but the actual sum was very small, 30 pieces of silver. It might have kept him going for a month or so, but not for very long.
So what other reasons could Judas have had?
There have been numerous theories over the years. Jesus wasn't doing anything to foment a rebellion, and so Judas decided that he would force his hand. By having Jesus arrested, Jesus would be more or less forced to call out for help, and the crowds would gather and they'd foment a rebellion, and it would start into mob violence against the Romans in Jerusalem. So it was to force Jesus' hand. That's one theory.
This is supported by an idea that Judas may have been a zealot.
Zealot means enthusiast. We could translate it as fundamentalist, terrorist, or freedom fighter. It depends on which side of the fence you're on. The Zealots were a group of people fighting for Jewish freedom, but they were enemies of the Roman state.
Additionally, the second part of Judas's name, Iscariot, may derive from the Latin word sicarius.
The sicarii means assassin. If you were a freedom fighter, you would say, hooray, these are heroes, these are martyrs of the state. If you were on the other side of it, it's a Latin word, it means terrorist.
If Judas was a zealot, then it's possible he wanted to use Jesus in his quest to free Judea from Roman rule. Perhaps most intriguing is the idea that Jesus actually wanted a confrontation with the Jewish authorities, and that Judas was helping him.
Perhaps Judas was in league with Jesus, and that Judas was doing it because Jesus even wanted this to happen, a sort of a showdown between him and the high priest, and perhaps he expected that something was going to happen at that point.
Jesus! No, Peter!
Get away, you scum!
Arrest them all! There! It was me you sought. You have found me. Let them go. Take him away!
Take him away! Take him away!
Take him to the Sanhedrin! Peter, do something! Peter!
Whatever motivated Judas, Jesus was headed for a direct confrontation with the Jewish authorities. All four Gospels agree that Jesus was arrested less than a week after he arrived in Jerusalem. He was taken to be interrogated by the Jewish high priest, played in the film by Anthony Quinn.
What is this doctrine you and your disciples are spreading through Judea?
I have spoken openly for all the world to hear.
According to the Gospels of Matthew and John, the high priest of the temple in Jerusalem was named Caiaphas. This is backed up by the writings of the first-century Jewish historian, Josephus, who says that Caiaphas served as high priest between the years 18 and 37 AD, placing him in Jesus' lifetime. His Hebrew name was Yosef bar Caiaphas. A 1990 discovery may have unearthed the first archaeological evidence of him. At the Israel Museum, Jerusalem, is a collection of containers called ossuaries. Wealthy Jews at the time of Jesus tended to collect the bones of their ancestors in these stone boxes. For museum curator David Mavora, there's one ossuary that's of particular interest.
So, David, what have we here?
The one you're standing next to was found in a tomb in Jerusalem, has the name of the deceased twice on it. Once on the narrow side and once on the back. And it says very clearly in Hebrew letters, Yosef bar Caiaphas. We are, of course, not 100% sure. It doesn't have a note in there, I crucified Jesus. But in all proximity, it is most probable that this is the man that we know from the story of the trial of Jesus.
We have so few objects that relate precisely to people and places of Jesus' time.
It is very exciting.
If this container really held the bones of Caiaphas, then we have physical evidence of the man in whose house Jesus stood before the Jewish authorities. According to a Christian tradition, Caiaphas' house was located in South Jerusalem. An archaeological site in the area could support this theory. Shimon Gibson has found evidence that Jewish priests lived in these houses in the 1st century.
This is an excavation which has taken place within the upper city of Jerusalem that existed 2,000 years ago. Excavations have shown palatial mansions side by side with poor houses.
So how does Shimon know that this house belonged to a priest of the temple?
It was part of a very large complex, clearly aristocratic. We assume priestly because of some of the finds which have been made here. And it has ritual pools, there's a very large kitchen area, and an interesting inscription in one of these mansions, Katros. And Katros is a priestly family that we know of, so it all falls into place. We do have priests living up here.
The grand scale of this house suggests that a wealthy priest like Caiaphas would have lived here, or at least in a house like this.
It is amazingly large. It meant that anybody coming into this house complex would have to approach it, would have to go through a labyrinth of hallways and upstairs and downstairs and through rooms until you got to the central courtyard.
In the Gospels, Peter the disciple follows Jesus and his captors into the house's central courtyard. The archaeological evidence supports the description.
We've excavated quite a few, not just by myself, but my colleagues, and the courtyard is always at the center of this labyrinth of rooms.
Although there was no evidence to confirm that Caiaphas lived in this exact house, it would have been in one like it that Jesus spoke some of the most important words in the New Testament.
I ask you now, in the name of the Eternal, are you the Messiah, the Son of God?
I am.
In the New Testament, it is written that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. The common perception is that Caiaphas would think this was blasphemy, that Jesus was saying he was divine. But in the Jewish scriptures, Son of God had a different meaning.
In ancient Judaism, the Son of God was understood to be a human being. The King of Israel, King Solomon, was the Son of God. King David was the Son of God. The future Messiah was a political leader, the Son of God. It didn't make him God, it made him human.
Rather than claiming to be divine, those accounts may indicate that Jesus believed that he was a human leader appointed by God. But in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus goes even further.
And you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power of God.
Son of Man may not sound like a divine being, but once again, in the Jewish scriptures, it had a particular significance.
The Son of Man was understood to be a cosmic judge who was coming on the clouds of heaven to destroy the forces of evil. He was an angelic, divine being. That's the Son of Man.
For many first-century Jews, the arrival of the Son of Man would signal the coming of the apocalypse, when God would defeat the forces of evil, the Roman occupation of Judea. But Jesus doesn't actually refer to himself as the Son of Man. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he answers in the third person.
He makes this somewhat vague statement about how they will see the Son of Man coming with clouds of glory seated at the right hand of the Father.
It's possible he was actually referring to someone else as the divine figure that ancient Jews called the Son of Man. But whether Jesus was warning of the imminent apocalypse, when the Romans would be defeated, or claiming to be the king who would lead the Jewish people in its wake, his message was a direct challenge to the ruling authorities. Now Caiaphas had all the justification he needed to hand Jesus over to the Romans.
Let him be taken before the procurator Pontius Pilate.
He would have looked at somebody like Jesus, a low-level provincial, somebody from Galilee, and he would probably have thought that it was much better to get rid of him than to risk allowing him to continue, and who knows what he might have done. He might have gone back into the temple, he might have disrupted the feast, and the implications of that could have been enormous, because Rome could have decided to send in troops into the very temple itself. That could have disrupted the whole of the Passover.
By handing Jesus over to the Romans, the Jewish authorities were sealing his fate.
Then let it be written that Jesus of Nazareth to be crucified.
The Gospels tell us that the Jewish religious authorities worried that Jesus had the potential to cause unrest in Jerusalem.
From the Jewish perspective, they might have seen him as a false prophet, somebody who's stirring up the people. These are charges from the Old Testament, and the punishment for those is death.
But in Roman-controlled Judea, the Jewish authorities didn't have the power to put Jesus to death, so they handed him over to the Romans.
They also didn't want a person who's come to Jerusalem at the busiest time of year. It's a really difficult situation. He's got a following. Crowds are coming after him.
His case was to be heard by the Roman governor of Judea, a man named Pontius Pilate, played in the film by Oscar winner Rod Steiger.
Welcome, Welcome! I leave for 1 week and I come back and I find the mob clamoring in the street, and you dare to say to me, welcome!
By the time Jesus gets to Pilate, the charge there seems to be that he or other people are claiming that he is in some way king of the Jews. He's some kind of messianic leader. He's a rabble-rouser. And so from both the Jewish and the Roman perspective, he's got to be eliminated.
Pilate lived in the ancient city of Caesarea, located on the Mediterranean coast of modern Israel. Robert has come here to meet Helen Bond.
So we've got his name here, Pontius Pilatus, the stone on the side of a building that Pilate erected to his patron, the Emperor Tiberius. This is the only physical evidence for Pilate at all. And what's also really important about the stone is this line here where it says his title, which is Praefectus Judea. So that shows that he was a prefect, which is significant because that's a military title, showing that he's really in charge, looking after the peace of the province.
Pilate is one of the few New Testament figures for whom there is actual physical evidence.
Why do we find him in Jerusalem in the Passover week, the Holy Week when Jesus was there?
It seems to have been his normal practice to go to Jerusalem for the feasts. There were 3 of these, and Passover was probably the most difficult one because it's a celebration of national liberation from bondage in Egypt. And of course, that's bound to stir up memories and resentments, particularly as people now find themselves occupied by Rome.
So essentially, his job was to keep the peace in the region, yes?
Yes, his main job is really to make sure that there's no riots and revolts and to send in the troops if any do occur.
According to the Gospels, Jesus stood before Pilate in a place called the Praetorium.
Is this the man you think so dangerous? This, the man that aspires to be a king?
Praetorium just means headquarters. Pilate could set his up wherever he chose. Traditionally, it has been associated with the site of the Antonia Fortress, an army barracks that was occupied by the Roman military. However, archaeologists have long believed that an immense palace that had previously belonged to King Herod the Great would have been a much more likely location. But until recently, little evidence of the palace itself had been found. Then, in the year 2000, archaeologists uncovered remains of the palace walls underneath the Tower of David Museum, half a mile from the Antonia Fortress. Robert has come to meet archaeologist Amit Rayem to take a closer look.
You are looking at the retaining walls, at the foundations of the magnificent royal palace built by Herod the Great in the second half of the 1st century BC. These are actually the remains of Herod's palace.
Amit believes that this palace, fit for a king, is a much more plausible location for Pilate's headquarters than the traditional site of the Antonia Fortress.
Now let's say that you are the Roman governor. You came with the Caesarea, with all the delegation, beautifully dressed, eating fantastic food, and you want to stay in Jerusalem. Do you go to the Antonia, which is a fortress of soldiers, stinky, crowded, smelly? No. You will go to Herod's palace, right here.
It is conceivable that when Pilate confronted Jesus, it could have been here.
If this is the site of the Praetorium where Jesus stood in front of Pilate,
Take him away, take him away.
then it is also where the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and John say that Jesus was led outside and flogged. And had a crown of thorns placed on his head. The Gospels tell us Jesus was led outside in front of the people. If Pilate's headquarters were here, then this must have happened very close by. Shimon Gibson believes that just a few hundred yards away, he has located the site of a gate through which Jesus was presented to the crowds.
So this is it. This is the gate. It dates from the time of Jesus. Based on the historical work that's been done and archaeology, there can be no doubt that this is a gate that led to the Praetorium, which was the place where the trial takes place. The gate itself is blocked in a later period, but these steps date from the time of Jesus and links into all of the historical information we know.
Gosh, it's extraordinary to see a step where Jesus stood.
Yeah, and there's very few places which can really associate directly with Jesus in Jerusalem.
No.
And this is one of them.
And there it is. All over Jerusalem, you see people venerating and kissing stone steps, doorways, pillars. If you're going to kiss anything, I would be kissing that.
This is the place.
Yes.
Even I'm willing to kiss.
Well, I was
these
going to
steps.
say, I think I might get up there and have a go.
So you're standing on the actual steps where they said, "This is the man."
I was led out onto a balcony. Very different. But not very different.
In a way, we're lucky that it was forgotten by tradition. If this spot had been recognized as the place throughout history, you would be now in the grotto of some church.
Yes, that's right.
Not standing where you are.
Yeah.
But there's a sense of place here, isn't there?
Yes, it is just extraordinary.
We have 2 prisoners. One, Jesus of Nazareth.
According to all 4 Gospels, Jesus was not alone as he stood on the steps of the Praetorium.
Or Barabbas.
Next to him was another prisoner named Barabbas, played in the film by Stacy Keach. Although all of the Gospels name Barabbas, they give different reasons for why he was being held by the Romans. The Gospel of John says he was a bandit, while Mark and Luke suggest he was involved in more revolutionary activity.
We're told that Barabbas was in prison because of his activities during an insurrection in which he committed murder. That would almost certainly mean that he fomented a rebellion against Rome that led to the murder of a Roman soldier.
The Gospels claim there was a Jewish custom to release a prisoner at the time of the Passover, and that Pontius Pilate gave the crowds the choice: save Barabbas or save Jesus.
Why don't you free yourself, Jesus? Which of the 2 shall be released to you?
The reality is, we have no record that Pontius Pilate ever released anybody for any reason from a capital punishment, or that any governor in the entire Roman Empire at any time in this period did that.
Jesus of Nazareth, or Barabbas.
The Jewish crowd is given the choice between a political insurgent and the Son of God. Whom do you want?
In the Gospels, the crowd chooses to save Barabbas and condemns Jesus to be crucified.
Then let it be written that Jesus of Nazareth is sentenced to be crucified.
The Gospel of Matthew says Pilate absolved himself of the guilt of sentencing Jesus, instead blaming the crowd. But would Pilate really have any concerns over condemning Jesus to die?
For a Roman governor, sentencing an impoverished peasant from Galilee with a very small following to death would have been easy. It would have been the kind of thing he did every day. For Pilate, executing Jesus was unproblematic, it was legal, and it's unlikely he would have given it more than a moment's thought.
Hey, Mark, where's the last prisoner? Come on.
Here's your man. Come on. The King of the Jews.
Hurry up, this crowd worries me.
Yep, take him.
In all 4 Gospels, after being sentenced, Jesus was immediately led away to be crucified. Every week, Christian pilgrims follow the route they believe Jesus took, the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows. The modern route starts at the site of the Antonia Fortress in the north of the city. But this route was devised for pilgrims long after Jesus' death. Shimon Gibson has identified the authentic site of Jesus' trial on the western side of the city.
Jesus was led into the city and was led along an ancient road which is probably about 6 feet below where we're walking at the moment. The Via Dolorosa in the 12th century was shifted to the other side of the city completely for reasons which had nothing to do with history. The real Via Dolorosa is the one we're walking along, and nobody knows it. All the pilgrims who walk along this street or cars that drive past us, nobody really understands that this is actually the real Via Dolorosa.
Over centuries of building and rebuilding in Jerusalem, this route was forgotten, and the modern route became part of Christian tradition. Both the traditional and the historical routes lead to the same place, the hill where Jesus was crucified, called Golgotha. Today, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands on the site.
Somewhere in this vicinity, taking tradition, taking all of the evidence we have, this is the place.
At the end of a long journey of investigation, we're finally in a place where there's no speculation. This is where 99.9% of people believed that he was crucified.
The scholarship would be in total agreement with you.
Jesus' crucifixion here is the most iconic image in Christian tradition. We know from ancient accounts that there were many ways this cruel punishment was inflicted, but the Gospels give no description of the actual methods by which Jesus was crucified. Robert has come to the University of Tel Aviv to meet Professor Israel Hershkovitz to find out how realistic his portrayal of the crucifixion would have been.
So Franco had Jesus thrown onto the ground, nails hammered into the hands, then using ropes hauled into the air. And once in position, somebody would hammer the nails into the feet. Now, were we close, do you think?
Well, honestly, I think you got it all wrong. I mean, the way you reconstruct Jesus on the cross.
Israel has bones of people crucified close to the time of Jesus that were found less than 2 miles from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. These bones have the corroded nails still embedded in them.
First of all, we know that this individual was indeed crucified.
We actually know the name of the person?
We even know the name of this person, because this was the last Jewish king of Judea.
Israel's new forensic analysis of these hand bones has convinced them that they belong to a man called Antigonus Mattathias. Antigonus was crucified by the Romans in the year 37 BC and replaced with their own favorite, Herod the Great.
He rebelled against the Roman, was defeated by Herod, which was at that time allied with the famous Mark Antony from the story of Cleopatra. Eventually he was crucified. We know it from Roman historical records, so we are quite sure about it.
These bone fragments could change our ideas about Jesus' crucifixion.
Let me show you, this is our hand. So if we put it this way, actually, what we see here is that actually the body of the nail is passing over this bone. So what it tells you basically that the nail was coming through the back of the hand and then bent over the finger in order to hold the hand to the crossbow.
A nail in a foot bone from another victim reveals even more.
This is the heel bone. This is the largest bone of the foot. And what you can see actually, this is parallel to this one, okay? The nail is coming from this side, from here, okay, from here, and coming out from here, okay?
Yeah.
Then from here probably went into the wood, which makes sense because this is the largest bone in the foot. I mean, so if you want to hold the foot to the vertical post, you need to hammer the nail through the largest bone and the strongest bone of the foot. The second thing that you notice is that the nail is very short. So what it tells you, that each foot was hammered separately to the wood. There is no way that the 2 foot were together.
So if the feet weren't nailed together on the cross, how does this fit with our traditional understanding of Jesus' crucifixion?
The nail is bending fully backwards. So how it happens? We can take a piece of wood, put it on a hard surface, take a hammer and start knocking on the head of the nail. If the nail is long enough, it will come out from the opposite side of the wood. It will hit the hard surface. If you will keep knocking, it will slowly, slowly, slowly bend backwards. The cross was lying on a hard surface. Jerusalem is all limestone, rocks, you know, and then the Roman soldiers hammer him while the cross was still on the ground.
Israel believes that victims were nailed to the cross while still on the ground. And this has also helped them to build a new theory about the shape of the cross itself.
When a police officer, you know, want to arrest a criminal, a violent criminal, the best way to control him, you know, is to put him on the ground and ask him to spread your arm and legs. You see, this way. Now, just put your finger and show me where the nail would go.
So the nail goes through here, yes?
Exactly.
What? And on the other side?
And on the other side.
And through there?
Exactly.
Yeah?
Exactly. Fantastic. Now, it takes us to the last part of our story. What it tells you, okay, that the cross was an X-shaped cross and not a T-shaped cross.
While the T-shaped cross became the iconic symbol of Christianity, Israel's archaeological evidence could turn that image on its head. Whatever the shape of the cross, all of the Gospels agree that the Romans hung a sign above Jesus bearing the title King of the Jews.
It's traditional in a crucifixion that the Romans would have put the reason for the crucifixion on the cross itself, and the whole point of that was to act as a deterrent. If you do this kind of thing, this is what happens to you. The title on the cross, the King of the Jews, is a description of the charge. And I think the Romans did think on one level that Jesus was claiming some kind of kingship.
The Gospels all give a description of the final moments of Jesus' life. However, they all offer differing versions of events.
In our earliest Gospel, the Gospel of Mark, the crucifixion is a very painful scene. Jesus is almost entirely alone. His final words seem to be words of abandonment. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In the Gospel of Luke, by contrast, there's an emphasis on forgiveness. His final words are more controlled.
"Into thy hands I commit my spirit."
In the Gospel of John, his final words are, "It is finished," a phrase that could also be translated as, "It's perfected," and there's no element of pain or suffering.
Yes. Accomplished.
Moreover, there is an element in the Gospel of Mark that may point to this version being the most plausible account of the crucifixion.
Mark has the moment on the cross when Jesus says, "My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" as in Aramaic.
Eli! Lama sabachthani.
Maybe Mark feels that these words are so holy that he wants to preserve them, the way that they've come down to him in the Aramaic language that, of course, the first Christians would have spoken.
Which is a language that Jesus
That Jesus
spoke.
himself would have spoken, yes.
Yeah. So in other words, it's more likely what he said, because it hasn't been altered or translated otherwise.
That's right, it could take us back to what the historical man said as he died.
The line, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" is extraordinarily poignant and very easy for an actor to understand, because almost for the first time in playing Jesus, I actually connected with specific human emotions, which are not evident in the Gospels at all.
But his death was not to be the end. For the followers of Jesus, what happened next would become the most significant event in the story of his life.
Hey, you, the family, come on, you can take the body.
The Gospel of Mark states that Jesus died after just 6 hours on the cross. For most victims, it took much longer.
How long would it approximately take for somebody who'd been crucified to die? And what eventually would be the cause of death?
Without water, without food, without anything, you would have died of dehydration. It took days for people to die.
Crucifixion was used as a deterrent by the Romans to discourage dissent across the empire. It was designed to be as brutal as possible, and the brutality continued even after death.
People would be left on the crosses for days, so the bodies would begin to deteriorate, and so the scavengers, especially birds, would attack the bodies. We have numerous references to this in our ancient sources.
The final disgrace was that victims usually weren't allowed to have a burial.
Part of the horror of crucifixion was that the victims did not have a burial. It meant the wiping out of their identity. It was considered extremely shameful not to have a decent burial in the ancient world.
All of the Gospels agree that Jesus was buried in a tomb. Professor James Tabor has brought Robert to some first-century Jewish tombs not far from the place of Jesus' death.
So this one is of particular interest. We could look at any of them, but look here, what you see here. This is actually quite rare. And you tell me what you see, because it's pretty amazing.
This is a rolling stone.
The rolling stone. And this is from the time of Jesus. This is the 1st century.
The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke all make reference to a rolling stone covering the entrance to Jesus' tomb. This made it possible to reopen the tomb at a later time to complete the funeral process. So what can the archaeological remains tell us about Jewish burial in the 1st century?
These benches, you see 3 of them here, they would lay the body out. And then these niches are to put the corpse in, and sometimes they would seal them up, and they would leave it for up to a year, and it would decompose. And then they would gather the bones and collect them and put them in a limestone box.
The common conception of crucifixion is that people are left up on the cross to rot, if you like.
Well, all over the Roman world, it is the case that the Romans often, to make an example of people, they would crucify them and leave them up and let them rot. But in Judea, in this country, and particularly in Jerusalem, because it's the holy city, there was much more of a sensitivity to the Torah, to the laws of Judaism. And one of those laws says you cannot leave a body of an executed person hanging overnight. And Josephus, the contemporary historian, mentions that the Romans made the exception in certain cases with the Jews, so it wouldn't foment, more trouble. But also we have archaeological evidence. 2 crucified skeletons, 2 different tombs, nothing to do with Jesus. And they were buried. So we actually have proof that Jews crucified in the 1st century were sometimes buried. So it's unusual in terms of the whole Roman world. But in this case, I think it actually does fit.
Both historical and archaeological evidence suggest that here in Judea, the Romans sometimes allowed victims of crucifixion to be buried. This could confirm the gospel accounts of Jesus being laid in a tomb. According to Christian tradition, Jesus' tomb is housed inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, right next to the place where he was crucified.
And archaeology here has shown quite convincingly that you have tombs here which date back to the time of Jesus, close to the actual tomb. So I think when you put all this evidence together, this has to be the spot.
It is here at the site of Jesus' death and burial that any evidence of the historical Jesus of Nazareth ends. His death meant that he could not be the Jewish Messiah. But for followers of Jesus, this isn't the end of the story.
The Gospels are trying to create a new religion. In order to do that, they have to separate themselves from Judaism.
And what the Gospels say happened next is impossible to confirm through archaeology.
He's gone.
Jesus is not here. I have seen him.
Seen who?
The Master.
You've seen him?
Yes. He is risen.
The story of Jesus' resurrection would inspire a new faith that 2,000 years later has become the biggest religion on the planet.
Since he was raised from the dead, they believed he was taken up to heaven. If he's taken up to heaven, he's made a divine being.
It's the profound belief by his followers that death was not the end and that God had raised him from the dead. that makes Jesus so different to anybody else.
Whether you believe the story or not, this story, the idea that after his death, he was raised up by God, this is the story that changed the lives of the apostles and that set in motion this huge religious movement.
Don't be afraid. I am with you every day till the end of time.
Ultimately, that story has had more significance than any physical evidence of the real Jesus ever could.
The real Jesus is the person that you want him to be. He is whoever you wish him to be. And I think that's probably better than having a factual Jesus who looked like this or behaved like this. It means you have much more freedom of thought. And I think that's probably a good thing in the end.